That's good.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's call to order at 6 o'clock on my computer. So let's call it 6 o'clock up. Just to note for the record that Commissioner Knox is remote. 5 other commissioners present in the first item on our agenda. Catherine, can you speak to that? Or the second item, ratification of election of officer?
Sure. Although there was an agreement amongst the members to amend the agenda on August 10th, no official vote was taken to approve the agenda as amended, as is the practice by the select board. So my recommendation would be that somebody make a motion to ratify the election of officers. Be a vote.
A motion to ratify the election of office.
Second that.
Moved by Daniel, seconded by John. Any additional discussion? Josh? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 6-0.
Hey, Daniel, would you mind? Oh, never mind.
Looks like someone else needs to be admitted, though.
So so the next item would be any changes to the agenda? I don't know. I don't see any, or are there any that you wish to introduce at this point?
I have none.
So at this point, for the agenda we have in front of us, we'll look to approve the agenda. I would take a motion to approve the agenda as is in front of us.
Will we approve the agenda as written for August 24th, 2023?
A second.
Moved by John, seconded by Georgia. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 6-0. Next item on the agenda will be public comments. Before we get in, actually, we don't have any applications, so I'm not going to feel a need to swear in public members at this stage. So at this point, this is an opportunity for the public to offer comment to us for items that are not on the agenda. If there's anyone, please, if you're online and you'd like to speak to us, please raise your hand using the online tool. That's underneath the reactions tab. If you're in the room and you'd like to say something, speak up. Hearing none, seeing none. We can now move on to the drafting and zoning draft zoning and subdivision. Big words tonight. The draft zoning and subdivision regulations discussion. Catherine, would you like to lead us into that?
Absolutely. So if you remember our process with this, at your last meeting, I had mentioned that the select board made some changes at their public hearing to the draft that you submitted to them. They are able to do that as long as they follow a couple steps after that. One is to sort of essentially send them back to you, but it is to amend your report, your planning commission report that is required by state statute. And essentially that report is saying that the changes that they made still conform with state statute. And the town plan, really, it's both of those things. And so at the last meeting, we discussed a couple of those changes. There really weren't that many changes, but we discussed those. There was concern in particular about one of the changes that they made, and that was about having adequate off-site parking for garage sales, and wondering if that is actually enforceable and a good idea to add this at this time. And the request was that I go back and, or not go back, but like assemble the comments and we'll send a memo off to the select board if you're all in agreement with that. So what I have done, two things. One is you can see the report that was in the packet. So that's the Planning Commission report, and it goes through, summarizes all the changes that the Planning Commission made, and in red, it's points out the changes that the Select Board made. And so we can talk about any of those changes in red if you would wish. And I would say the other thing that we'll talk about is the draft memo that I prepared for you all, and see what you think about it. If you have questions, comments, changes, and then after all that, there should be some sort of decision about approving this, especially the Planning Commission report. But if you're going to send a memo, there should be agreement on that.
Thank you. So I mean, let's open up the amendments and look at the items in red. I mean, I think some of these should be relatively.
Yeah. So do you want me to pull up the memo?
I think so. That would be good.
Okay.
I had a couple questions on them, but let's go through them and just look at them all, because there's not a lot.
Sometimes it's hard for me to figure out which one. This is no.
That looks like the letter that you.
It is the left.
But this is the one I was referring to.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I have for some reason both are called memo on my thing. Okay. Okay. So I'm not on the page. Okay. So the first part of this is really the Planning Commission report where you talk about what show red. Really weird. There's some pigment that's missing in the screen, so I'll look up there. So I think table 2.1 is where we start with red. So that is the summary use chart. So actually there are several things in the use chart as well as the zoning district tables that and somewhat throughout the document. So the first one in this 2.1, there's the state Act 47, also called the Home Act, made some changes to housing. And I think have mentioned to you before, there's a lot of changes that we're still just as planners trying to figure out, and differing opinions on what they mean. I thought about let's add them all to this draft. And so that was one of my thoughts. I'll suggest that to the select board. They can make those changes. But again, there's too much ambiguity.
Ambiguity?
There you go. Thank you. Wrong emphasis on the syllable there. So what did seem easy was
I'd like to get credit for that word, please.
changing family to unit in places, also changing family to household, and then going down to also to table 2.1 in the summary use chart. This is on the same page, but also in some different pages. The Home Act suggests changing duplex or 2-unit to duplex, and then there's also for the first time a definition in statute of what duplex is. So adding that to the regulations. And then down to section 2, zoning district tables. So impacting all the zoning districts that allow residential uses. The Act 47 says that wherever you have a single family unit allowed, you need to allow a duplex with the same dimensional standards as a single family. So that was all I felt comfortable changing from the most recent updates in state statute. So that was presented to the select board. They were fine with that. Then
Are we going to try and discuss all of the changes at once, or can
a good question.
because I think some of these are pretty easy to
Yeah.
mark off, but others may be subject to further discussion.
So the ones that are in red are what the select board has kicked back to us, right?
Right.
So I just, I don't know. Let's see how they roll out. Each one we can dig into a little bit, I think, as it's there.
You want to go back up?
No, I just, these first ones seem more changes to be consistent with legal standards, right?
Yes.
So I just wanted to make sure, we had an opportunity to look at, various sections that were changed depending on what is actually being changed. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So like actually pulling up the zoning regulations. Is that
Well, no. So yeah, as long as, as we go through, we can maybe look at specific ones, that would be great. That are marked in red. I'm just looking at some of the changes that they're making. Some of them are actual changes to the regulations, and others are just legal language changes,
Okay.
right? So
Yeah.
that's all I was asking about.
Yeah, we can absolutely pull that up.
I
when you
think
want.
everybody should be comfortable with what we're in front of us. So if it requires
Yep.
us digging in deeper, let's do it. That's
Yeah.
especially with you folks that are seeing these things here for the first time, in this particular environment. Let's just dig in as anybody feels they need to.
Yeah. So are we good on what we've seen already, or do you want to
No, I think we're okay.
good on that one? Okay. All right. So I think the next one is section 3.43B. And
This one challenged me a little bit to understand why, what they were. I mean, this was,
yeah. All right. Well, let me pull this one up.
I think that was one that, we were trying to
Clarify.
and be consistent with what's actually been done. And with the
It looks like, based on comments here, though, that it's not necessarily a rejection of the change, just a request to restate,
I think this was within the RPDI,
Yeah.
and there's been a lot of discussion about what can go in the buffers, how do we use the buffers, because it's been traditionally the front 50-foot buffer has been, we've allowed waivers for vegetation improvement and or use of a 50-foot buffer for stormwater, but we specifically haven't allowed structures, which is I think what we were trying to capture and what we offered to the select board.
Right. I think in this particular one, the discussion was around parking, concern about allowing parking in the buffer to begin with, where
Right.
you've never, in the 50-foot buffer, where you've never allowed that. Sorry, it's taking.
thank you for navigating on our behalf.
Okay. So, now maybe I should pull up what you, well, this is sort of supposed to represent this. Maybe this is the document to pull up. So essentially what you had done, I think, is cross out that may be allowed within the 50-foot buffer and add the 50. So what's shown in red is what you did.
Do these reflect all the buffers that are a part of the RPDI, 50, 100, 100 and 200 foot?
Yeah.
Yes.
So why not just state that they cannot be in any buffer zones?
So I think the planning or the select board's concern,
So I think they're concerned because in D, we're offering a waiver for in the 50-foot buffer only. Which is what we've done. I mean, it's consistent with what has been done. It's been offered in that particular area. The 50-foot buffer hasn't had a tremendous amount of natural growth that was healthy growth. It's usually a lot of it's scrub trees and or bushes. So
Mhm.
there's been a consistent approach to allow the 50-foot buffer that's in front. That 50-foot buffer is between the road and the lot. 50-foot buffer has been used for primarily stormwater management and the landscaping, so it's consistent presentation along Corporate Drive as the primary space. Corporate Drive and the other side, Thompson. We haven't allowed any intrusion into the 200-foot buffer, and the 100-foot buffer is in between structures, and that hasn't been intruded, I think, except for trails. I think that's what we've used that for.
Right. I think that, I was trying to, at the select board meeting, explain the reason why that this was a suggestion. There was concern or thought it was confusing saying that like in the 50-foot buffer, you cannot allow access drives and components of stormwater management systems, which you kind of need an access drive somewhere. And I mean, it's true, you need one in the 100-foot buffer as well, not the 200-foot buffer, but if there's more development along Allen Martin, that's where the 100-foot buffer is in the front. So there was that, and then looking down at D, it seemed like as written without adding this new language, that was adequate.
I guess rereading it like that, I'm not gonna argue.
Not to overcomplicate, but isn't there an opportunity to just re-clarify section D, like rather than, because I think that it does make sense to have a clear distinction of what is and is not allowed in the buffers, and what can and cannot be done in the buffer, right? And so
yeah. I think the only concern that I see in that is that there was a decision early on in your amendment process to not muck around in the RPDI, really, because there's potentially some other changes that you're going to be discussing. So whether they be use changes or buffer improvements, the idea was to hold off on those changes. So, which is fine. I mean, this obviously has already been brought up as a potential change. So just clarifying what your intentions are, I think is fine. But I just wanted to throw out that.
So maybe to your point, Daniel, and D, we add in that buffers in the 50-foot. I mean, waivers in the 50-foot buffer could be granted for stormwater management, landscaping. I mean, it doesn't say that right now.
Access drives.
Yeah.
Yeah, under special circumstances or something,
Right.
That do need to be qualified. It can't just be that a waiver can be offered.
Waivers should never be considered to be automatic.
Yeah.
Waivers should always be, there should always be a solid reason for a waiver.
But that's exactly my point, is like, if you qualify what the special circumstances are, then
you don't need a waiver. Then you make it. Then it's part of the regulation. So that's the other side of that, right? If you make it too granular, it becomes the regulation and it is no longer a waiver.
Well, how do you manage the permit of waivers then? Like
as limited as possible and consistent in that area. This is a historical approach, but in that area between Corporate Drive and Thompson Drive, there's been a defined effort or determined effort to provide consistency along the road frontage, because there's not consistent vegetation along either. There's a need for stormwater management, and it's been a adequate place to use that for stormwater, because most of the time those get grassed over. They become part of the landscape as much as, they're less of a structure and more of landscape.
I don't think you have to get super granular, though. You could simply say like special circumstances may be allowed to create safety standard to maintain safety standards or preserve
So-
natural environments or something like that, right?
So adding to that first sentence where it says, but may waive buffers in the 50-foot area for special circumstances such as, or just for special circumstances. We have to probably get that a little bit of granularity on that. But not much.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at the B back up there, where parking areas, access drives, and components of stormwater management seem to be the things that are pointed out already. So is that what could be waived in the?
Anything that's prohibited. I mean, waivers are exceptions. So
Limiting it to those things? Although I think you were saying like not parking areas, like that's the one thing, but the others, access drives, stormwater.
in from a historical perspective, this is a big step forward from what there used to be, which the planning commission used to have 100% say in what went on in
Make
there.
a ruling.
And it was, I mean, the zone was set up to give the planning commission complete flexibility to look at any project coming in.
Mm-hmm.
This actually started to narrow it down by saying you can't do this in this zone, or this this buffer. That also lends you to the idea that why do we need a 50-foot buffer, which has been brought up before.
Right.
We can always call it we can always define it as a space that could be used for stormwater management, access drives, and nothing else. I mean that's where we
Right,
start
it's a-
getting into the next
into the
It's a set-
further revisions that you guys
Yeah.
are proposing later. Yeah. Well, I mean, just to ensure that we have clarity on maintaining those buffers, and I think that's important. And I'm a little miffed that the select board isn't allowing space for that, or pushing back in this regard. That's where. So as long as we can find a path forward where there is clarity on how buffers are to be used, then I think that there's a path forward.
I think that's the intention, right? You
Yeah.
want to take another dive into a deeper dive into the RPDI after the comments that you've heard recently.
because there's been a lot of public comment about
About
why do we have buffers? If we're using waivers, why do we even have a buffer?
What
in
are
the
they
first place?
for? What are the, yeah.
Right. And maybe it becomes a design zone, not so much a prohibited buffer, but a design area that's used strictly for
Right.
access and or stormwater management with no structures allowed. Whatever, I mean, but that's like the next phase of how do we curb that. And there's been folks that have talked about the 200-foot buffer over the years. Do we want it to be a visual buffer? Do we want it to be a sound buffer? Do we want it to be a space of no build? What is that 200-foot zone for? And traditionally, it was a no intrusion space except for utilities, and it had to have a forest management plan for it. Now they've got a lot of separate owners, so that calls that into question as well. But again, we're getting another level of buffer question.
Josh has a hand up.
Josh, all right, go ahead, Josh. Thanks, Ken.
I think you're right that a lot of it depends on where we land with the current RPDI comment process. But a thought I had about the clarity of number 3 as it's currently written is if you put D where B is and then follow with B and C, it does make a little more logical sense in how the buffers are supposed to operate. So you start with the 200-foot buffer requirement, ... Then go to the planning commission may not waive buffers in 100 or 200, but can for 50-foot for the following reasons, as you guys have been discussing. And then you can go to B if you want to specifically call out, here's the things you definitely can't waive. It wouldn't require a change to anything we've written here. And again, this is dependent on the RPDI comment process, but looking at it as it is right now, I think that would provide more clarity because you're saying what the buffers are for, that you can't waive anything in these. But once you say, okay, you can in the 50, then it's perfectly fine in the new C, former B, to call out, yeah, but you can't do that even in the 50. If that makes sense, just as a flow of the way the document's written.
I think in terms of revisions, that makes a lot of sense. But just to be clear, Josh, are you suggesting that shift in order also maintains the omission of that last line that was taken out, but mainly,
The but may be allowed.
yeah.
Well, I don't genuinely know, but I was just thinking the general, like, for establishing the principle, because if we come back to this later after we get more public comment, like I said, I don't want to weigh in necessarily on that sentence, but I think if the select board was having trouble with it, it may be because we go from buffer requirement to here's what you can't do, and then all the way down at D is you can't waive buffer requirements. I just think putting D first, then we could say, okay, so you can in the 50, and then here's something that you definitely can't in the 50. And I don't know about the actual, like, matter itself of these things can be allowed in the 50, the parking, access drives, and components of stormwater management. I mean,
So let's remember too that we're responding to the changes that the select board has made. So, I mean,
right.
they've just said strike the detail that we wanted to add because it was already covered in the way I'm reading it is they're saying it's already covered in the waiver language that we talked about in D, because both B and C talk about shall and shall nots,
Right.
and D can override both of those in the 50. Trevor?
Just a question about the language, the use of the word may as opposed to shall.
Yep.
Is that done on purpose?
Yeah.
That's why the waiver's there. I mean, that the waiver is the may portion of the, you know, it's in as the way I read this in A, B, and A and C at least, and B is implied, but it's shall apply, shall not be or may not be located, and shall be preserved. And then in D, we can waive the requirements in the 50-foot zone, buffer zone only.
Well,
See how detailed this is?
well, yeah, no, but to go back to what you were saying in terms of just trying to respond directly to what the select board has commented on, like their comments are specifically about clarity. So I think that Josh's, observations and suggestions stand, because what the select board was specifically trying to identify is how to make this more clear, right?
Yep.
So, even though it is going outside of the specific line items in question, that is where clarity is needed, right? So I don't think that that's outside the purview of what we're trying to do here.
So what we're doing, yeah, and I'm not arguing that at all. What we're doing is we're going to be potentially providing them additional suggestions to clarify for clarity. So, Josh, are you at a point where you could sort of restate what you're?
Yeah. So what I'm proposing is the current subhead D, put that right after A, and then I would reinstate the but may be allowed within 50-foot buffers, which is the thing that the select board rejected as on the grounds that it was confusing, unless I'm misunderstanding this. And then I think it would make perfect sense, because we'll lead by saying the 200-foot buffer requirement shall apply. Done. And then the new B, we're saying you can't do anything in 100 or 200 foot, but you can do something in the 50, and here's the process for that. We need to explain why, the basis, mitigation. And then in the B, with our language restored, we're saying, just to be totally clear, you can't do any of this stuff in the 100 or 200, but it does apply as a thing you can do in the 50, which would follow what we just said in the new B. If that makes sense.
So it would go A, D, C, B? Or
A, D, the new order would be A, D, B, C, with our language for B restored.
restore?
As here is a thing you can do. I mean, you could almost. No, I'm not going to say you could almost, because that would confuse the matter. I was saying you could almost remove the reference to 100 and 200 and just say, oh yeah, here's the thing you can do in 50 as such a thing. But I think I'm fine with it still saying you can't in the 100 or 200, just to be totally clear.
So essentially,
A-
it goes back to the original language, but just reorganized. A little
And
bit.
Yeah,
here's,
yeah. Our original language, original language A, D, B, C, I guess I should have just said it like that.
so here's a concern I have with putting C last, is we do allow and have allowed waivers for vegetation. So are we, I mean,
That's mostly where they are, aren't they?
yeah,
is
it's that vegetative, that it's generally to provide the appropriate vegetation. So
So maybe it's
I feel like the statement that we can do a waiver should be the final thing.
So it's A, D, C, B, maybe.
A, D, C, B. Or Dusty, are you saying then, if I'm understanding you, take D, put a period after 200-foot buffers,
Correct.
and then as a new one, then say the planning commission may waive buffer requirements in the 50-foot buffer area, and then follow with C and B as currently written?
No, I'd leave the order the way it is. And I think what I'm taking a little bit of what Daniel was mentioning before. Period after 200-foot buffers.
Mm-hmm.
New sentence.
In D.
This is in D. New sentence that may waive buffer requirements in the 50-foot buffer area for special circumstances. I don't know that we can identify what those are, because that's the essence of a waiver. Somebody's got to make a pitch for a reason.
Well,
And-
you have to be able to qualify the waiver. Like,
But
there has to be parameters around.
right, so we make that for special circumstances, and then we identify the special circumstances are stormwater management, access, or landscaping. Because in C, we're saying all existing trees and vegetation shall be preserved. So we want to be able to, this is my take on it. So we want to be able to we want to have a waiver for vegetation, landscaping. We want to have a waiver for access. We want a potential waiver for stormwater. It's not guaranteed, because if it's guaranteed, then it's a regulation, and we're not at the point of making a regulation, which was what we were looking at to do in a more evolved RBDI review.
You're not really making any changes. Again, it's just clarifying.
It's just clarifying, and I think providing some clarity that waivers special circumstances around landscaping, stormwater management, or access, because we may want a waiver for fire department access. I don't know why we were going fire department access in the 50-foot buffer, but I mean, that's to me, it's that access is really what we're looking at. And ultimately, I would think we'd potentially want to get to the point where we don't have that be a waiver and it become a regulation, and we actually regulate it. This is the landscaping pattern that must be. This is where stormwater must be. This is your access must be like this.
Yeah. Well, if it is like very stipulated in that regard, that makes sense. I think where it can be useful as a waiver is that, you're still signaling that this is an exception, not the standard, right?
Right.
And the standard should be to preserve the buffer, as much as possible. I think that's where the standard lies right now in the RPDI, right?
Well, if you look at D, the second part of that says, if waived, the planning commission shall explicitly state in its approval that a waiver has been granted, the basis for the waiver, and any condition it deems necessary to mitigate the loss of vegetation with additional landscaping. I think it brings it back to you're losing that vegetation, and there has to be a plan with the waiver, associated with the waiver, to vegetate.
It's I'm not going to say it's a slippery slope, because it's got to be 15%. But it's a challenge to do this on the fly. We've already done a round of regulation changes, and when we specifically were trying to tweak this to provide some more clarity, that we don't want parking areas in there. We don't want anybody even to try to ask for a parking area, which right now they could come in today and say, I have a special circumstance, I want a parking area. But if we've taken the route that I think you're suggesting, and start clarifying that waivers could be evaluated on the basis of stormwater, landscaping, and access.
Mm.
And we've at least provided some direction, some criteria to base a waiver on.
Yeah, to limit the request for waivers and also provide direction for when waivers may be appropriate, right? Whereas, leaving that type of information out, the waiver can then be applied at any point per the commission's,
For the makeup of it would be on the how bold is the developer
yeah,
and what's the makeup of the commission.
right. And that, I think, is too politically driven, right?
And then this
clarity is preferred.
and this was a phased approach. Again, remember that you weren't here obviously, but initially it was all the purview of the planning commission to decide what was appropriate for any application that came in. There was no need for a waiver because planning commission could make that
Made
decision.
the decision.
And that's the RPDI has been evolving over the last couple decades, and this is a point. I think it's got to keep going. I mean, there's been a lot of questions about more questions about the 200-foot buffer. Like what it's there for, how it's supposed to be used, what's it supposed to do.
Yeah,
That's a bigger.
it is.
issue.
That's definitely a much larger conversation that will take more time. But
Yep.
yeah, I think for clarity's sake, either what Josh was saying or this the special circumstances, perhaps even a combination of the two, where you just create the right flow, and then have that special circumstances to defined so that we have that clarity moving forward when we make those further revisions.
So, Catherine, Kent, from your perspective, what makes sense? Again, we're responding to the select board's first review of what we sent up to them.
My thought is maybe Josh's, just for simplicity sake. I feel like doing a little more editing on the fly. I'd maybe want to think about additional language before making a decision tonight.
So how about we ask Josh to send his version to you, and then you guys can hash that out and then kick it back out. Is that reasonable?
Yeah, I think the only issue is with timing. The select board is seeing these amendments again on September 18th. And the way statute reads is that you have to have given your response back 10 days before.
So we're pretty much on the short.
I think, yeah,
Just
unless
pretty
you
much
have an
tonight.
extra meeting. I think your next meeting is the 14th September. So
So that's too
It's
it's
too
too close. So we really decision tonight. Well, we've got 6 members. We haven't heard from everybody. John, Georgia.
Well, I'm unsure why. So what Josh said made sense to me. Switching it around for clarity, we can't just propose that and say we need to have it written up to get back. I'm a little unsure about the process.
the process.
Yeah.
yeah, so I think if you say nothing about it, it'll go forward as they removed this language,
Which I they thought was
right? Or added it
Confusing.
back, I guess, and removed, as a
Mm.
combination of both.
Mhm.
If you include, like in the memo that we have that I drafted up, language about here's where we think this might get at what we were going for, here's our suggestion of why to make this change, then they can consider that change. But if we had another meeting to talk about this, it would be easier, because then like I could go back and talk with Josh and work
Yep.
on it. But in this case, you have to decide, unless you do hold an extra meeting, and you could just hold it for this small topic, or maybe there's some other things that are going to come up as we're discussing.
So let's hold on that. Let's hold the decision, because maybe as we get into this, it'll be
Mhm.
clear that we have to go one route or another. But we won't walk away from that tonight.
Okay. All right. So then getting back to the other changes. So I realized after I sent this out, if you're looking on your version, not sure the fences and walls change showed up, which is like the big one that we talked
Oh, for
about.
feces?
Yeah, I think so.
Where feces are only permitted.
Oh, right. That's not a,
So the select board
Yeah.
offered that?
they did not. That would be typo from me.
Well, we gotta have a little fun.
So anyway, so this is, yeah, so you had made the change, just saying, maybe I should pull up the original zoning again. So it's this electric and barbed wire fences. So that's D. So what you had initially done is just to try to clarify this. So you were essentially saying, or the way the language was written is it's electric fences are prohibited in these particular districts. And so you had made the change to say, instead of saying they're prohibited, say here's where they are permitted. And the select board was like, well, why even say districts? Isn't it more for use? So the use is agricultural use, that generally you're going to want barbed wire or electric. And just like kind of just make it clear, if that makes sense. So,
Except that agricultural uses aren't limited to an AR zone. They're limited.
correct. And I think that was their thought. Actually, it's okay.
So it's
if you
okay
have an
to-
agricultural use in another zone, it's okay to have.
Barbed wire and or electric fences. And I guess from a residential perspective, I would argue against that. But I mean, it's
We're already limited in what we can do with agricultural uses as a town.
Yeah.
It was sort of in that vein.
Can I ask a question about that? Would agricultural uses include, like if you have chickens in your yard or other livestock and you're trying to protect them from predators? Is that included with what would be allowed? Is that not considered an agricultural use on a residential
Yeah.
property?
So there are two different sorts of agricultural uses, and they're both in our regulations. One is where the agricultural uses that the town cannot regulate, and that would be if you have like 100 chickens, or if you have like there's specific numbers of farm animals that then we don't have any say in at the town.
or a sugar bush.
Right. Yeah. And forestry, right. Yeah. So, but then when you get down to the having 4 chickens, we are allowed to regulate that, but that is also considered an agricultural use.
Okay. I was just wondering if that would allow, just because it was a thing I heard on how do you not attract bears to your property, and one thing that was mentioned was you can have electric fences around chickens in that house. So I was just wondering if that would be included or not. And it sounds like it would be included. You could ask for having an electric fence around or barbed wire around something like
Around
that,
your-
even on a residential property.
So the state exemption for agricultural use, does that also include structures and fences and so forth?
Definitely structures. You know, you still need to meet setbacks, that sort of thing, but
And I just wondered if that exemption also would include the fences.
Fences.
I mean,
I
because
don't
if
know.
it is, then it's like we're talking about with the other thing. If we can't regulate it anyways, what are we including it for?
well, when you are talking about 4 chickens, that's different than 100 chickens.
Yeah.
So like we can regulate that 4 chickens, and we do actually. We have the chicken ordinance.
But that seems like this language doesn't accommodate that either. So if you got 4 chickens based on this change, you can put up barbed wire fence and electric fence. And
That seems neighbors' kids go up and touch the electric fence. And
Not to the first one. It's the last one in the line that gets it.
Um, I'm not aware of like what the public comment was that they're referencing. So select board added language about tall fences as was requested by the public in a prior public comment PC draft. So what
Oh,
were the
that's-
public comments?
That is a different,
that's the
Isn't
next
that
one.
three
different one.
3.4e? Is that what we're looking
That's the
at?
next
We're still
one.
in B, C,
Oh.
and D.
I didn't realize that. Oh, I see what you're saying. In the C1 AR, okay, forgive me. We were talking about fences and I got my wires crossed.
They're
It's there, it's
basically
coming.
they're proposing to remove the restriction of zoning.
no, just for agriculture. I mean, it was agriculture before, now it's just agriculture
I
uses.
I think they're. I would ask them to restore the language that we put back in, because if it's exempted by the state, this covers it. Otherwise, if it's 4 chickens, it's zonable, and it's not really an agricultural use. I mean, this is talking about agricultural purposes, which is a pretty broad stroke. And I think that's a miss potentially. It's an opening. I think there's risk involved
Mhm.
if we don't. To the point that we just hammered on a little bit ago, I don't think that provides enough specificity. If something's exempted by the state, certainly it's exempted by the state, and we don't have any say in it one way or the other. But otherwise, kind of thinking that we don't necessarily want barbed wire fences in
District.
pretty well
Or
AR
more, the
district.
more, yeah.
C and AR, sure, but
Yeah.
um,
Well, and before, it looks like it was just the C1, AR, and R1 that allowed it. Where, they weren't named out for what was prohibited.
Yeah.
Right, and it didn't say anything in that case about, like, why your change was saying it's for agriculture. So I think that the concern was, maybe it's a bigger issue of, can you have agriculture in the other zoning district? And what kind of agriculture? That's a good question too. What are we talking about?
but this doesn't specify that you can have it for certain purposes. It says agricultural purposes. Their change was to strike it,
Right.
and be agriculture uses, not even purpose, but agriculture use, and that's a pretty broad stroke. And
Yeah, that could be
that's-
just a garden, right?
That's
That be
defined.
agriculture?
Section 4.2 defines agriculture uses.
Oh, it does.
Yeah, if you can jump to 4.2 and then
4.2.
the graphic.
And Josh has a
I'll back.
Josh, go ahead. We're not seeing you.
Kent's
the only one that sees you, so just speak up if you.
I was just going to ditto what Dusty said about going back to our original version over the select board version, because unless specifically told otherwise here, I'm reading it as your 4 chickens can have an electric fence for the neighborhood kids to play on, and that doesn't sound like a good idea. If 4 chickens does count as agricultural use, since it does say agricultural uses including the keeping of poultry, and it doesn't say the number of poultry, 4 chickens is the keeping of poultry in a plain reading. And so you could have R2 and R3 electric fences, unless I'm missing something. That's what it sounds like to me. So ditto to Dusty, I guess.
Well, hang on. I may have to retract. Thanks to what John just found, uses has a much more defined. It's much better defined,
Yeah.
and it.
Oh, I didn't see E. Except for backyard chickens. Okay, that changes it a great deal. Except for backyard chickens. That does change it a lot.
So where uses means feedlots, fenced runs, pens, so fenced is there.
Yeah.
similarly intensively used facilities for animal raising and care.
And it does say that shall not be located within 300 feet. So, I mean, I think we're getting out of the
Small
the
lot
small
in the
lot.
middle of
So
a
I
neighborhood.
think that's a good catch, John. That by that the use of the word uses, it pulls in a specific set of criteria.
And it does identify the same districts.
Sounds like you need to have a definition. Cultural use.
Well, that's
It's
what
right
we're
there.
looking at.
Yeah.
It's
That's
right
where
there.
we're looking. Could you
If it's well defined.
Yeah, I think that's
Right.
where we're leading to at this point is the select board's suggestion of striking the individual zones and using the term agricultural uses directly relates back to 4.2.
Yeah.
So there is specificity in that already.
and I didn't realize that the section E did say backyard chickens and call them out as something exempt. So that answers my initial concern. Good catch by John.
So I think it's a no.
Okay.
I think it looks good.
It just adds a little bit of simplicity and clarity and
Gets rid of some words.
Mhm.
Okay,
Okay.
3.4E.
Okay. So fences, again, more fences. So back in maybe an initial round of zoning reg updates, and I think even through March, there was some language in the draft that discussed that fences not exceed 8 feet in height, essentially. And there's also some language about they had to be pretty short, much like short fences in the front yard. And so the select board said no to that, but let's bring back the language that was proposed before about having fences not exceeding 8 feet on the property lines and fences not placed on top of one another. So I expressed why the planning commission took that out before, and they were persuaded to add this.
I don't know if they've heard if they heard and chose not to, then they heard and chose not to.
I mean, you are definitely welcome, though, to reiterate your concerns to them in writing. If we're working on a memo, we could add something in there if you're all so inclined. You know, we've got some different members here.
Yeah. So as I said, I'm not privy to the public comments that were made, as was requested by the public. You know, so they changed this back based on.
We'd had a member of the public who had asked, I think it was a single member of the public who had asked for limitation based on construction near them. They wanted to have a maximum height. And there was also a situation where a neighbor had I believe to obtain the height that bothered them, they'd stacked fences on top of each other. So this is one of those that, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, please continue.
This is one of those that I think there is state statute talking about, you know, loss of light and air.
Yeah, it's
And so
actually in the regulations already.
That it just seems like that's.
So we're talking about kind of a border dispute between two landowners. Like, are you talking? Is this residential or?
It was residential.
Hmm. Does that text mean that if you had a 5-foot high fence, you could not add another 3-foot high fence onto it to make it 8 feet? You'd have to have one. You couldn't have like a solid 5-foot fence and then put like a lattice 3 feet on the top.
You know, I think that if anything, that one sentence is overkill. You're going to have something in, if you're saying you can't do it, if you can only do 8 feet, then it starts getting into the personal preference. And maybe my design point is I want to have solid for the first 4 feet and picket or lattice for the next 4 feet.
Yeah.
And that's where we start getting into, we're not in design control.
Right.
So it's,
Mm-hmm.
I thought of that initially too, and you summarized it nicely. Because I was wondering, like, what defines a fence, right? Do we need to define a fence if we're going to say you can't put one on top of the other? So,
if you've got-
because of that thought, a lot of
Right.
them have
Maybe
like
it's just one
step
fence.
lattice or something on top of it.
Or
Or
just
even-
reframe it like fences, no matter how constructed, cannot exceed 8 feet.
and personally, I'd like not to even have that limitation because I think it's
Hmm.
it's
No,
getting into a personal preference.
If
sort of
it's on
thing.
someone's personal property, they should be able to put a high fence if they want privacy. Is
I
that
mean,
what
it's
you're
a
suggesting?
it's a structural. There might be structural limitations, but if we're not intruding upon the state description of nuisance, and we're not depriving light and air, I'm not really sure where or why we're and it's not in a design control district. Why are we getting into it?
So Sharon is chiming in from afar, saying that that's letter C, where we're talking about the light and air. Was not enforceable in this particular situation that we're talking about.
She's saying where it already states that the structure put up for the purpose of annoying the owners or adjoining property by obstructing their view or depriving them from light or air. She's saying that's
Yeah.
not sufficient.
Yeah. In this particular case, so it might be in some other case.
It's design. I mean, if we're it's basically it's design control. Is by saying you can't have it in a certain way. I mean, if anything, fences should not be placed on top of each other. They should be struck. I mean, that's if you've got a wire fence and you've got wire fences generally 4 feet high, and you want it to go 8 feet because you've got an animal that jumps, or you got your 4 chickens.
You don't want to, pay for the cost of removing the old fence and putting in an entirely new
Well,
fence.
I mean,
Cost alone would be.
a roll of 4-foot chicken wire versus a roll of 8-foot chicken wire is pretty significant. And
Yeah.
so this is it's design. It's design control in areas where we don't have design control.
I'm curious why it's not enforceable if it's state statute. Oh, they call out the statute right there that says it.
Civil.
Okay.
So yeah, I think that person could still see off of their property.
Okay.
And again, that if it's
There was
That's Sharon.
separation.
yes, Paul.
Ask the question. What determines where go and where you
Districts. We have a design control district. It's not everywhere isn't design control.
And what would
well, how is that determination made again? On what basis?
for a design control district to be established? Is that what you're asking? What determines a design control district?
We have an existing design control district. It's primarily the Route 15 corridor between 128 and and Essex Way. It's not even go. It doesn't even go that far.
No, I think it goes
Oh,
all the way to 289.
okay.
Yeah.
So it's a business design control district, but that's where we have the ability to talk about colors, business, colors, materials, and so forth.
Okay, and so, well, what about impacts in, if you're talking about fence height and things like that, and I mean, the other thing that I've heard mentioned in terms of, I had it mentioned in terms of electric fences. What if you have a vegetable patch and you want to keep rabbits, raccoons, smaller neighbors out of it? Are you not, I mean, in a residential area?
So I think the focus right here is the height,
On that
and
one.
so that's what we're chewing on right now. The line that says fences should not be placed on top of each other, it's odd because that's a very unique circumstance or specific, but it's also a limiter. Like to understand better before we just accept that and put it as a regulation. Either strike it completely off, suggest that it be struck completely, or let's get a little more clarity on what it is. I mean, are they saying stockade fences should not be stuck, stacked on top of each other?
They didn't get into any discussion on
Right.
it.
So this is in my mind, I would think the suggestion to them is that this is not enough. This is too open-ended.
So the example, if you
regulation.
have a 6-foot fence and you just want to put a 2-foot fence on top of it, can't.
Or what if you have a 2-foot section
Yeah.
on the bottom that's ornamental and whatever. I mean, that language says that you can't.
Maybe ugly to some, but not all.
But even the point of chicken wire, like if you've got a wire fence, not even the chain link, but just a wire fence, and you want to put that up, even if you want to put it up to 6 feet, you can't stack 2-3 foot sections based on
Right.
that. So I think that's
It has unintended consequences as worded the way that has been put by the select board is what you're suggesting. Right?
I am.
Yeah.
And if that is designed to resolve a very unique and individual situation,
It will create more conflict.
that's like spot zoning almost. We're putting something townwide to address an individual situation, and that can have very long, wide ranging effect. And to anybody's point about the farmer, this basically says a farmer can't put in a high fence for anything.
Really?
Well, this says 8 foot
Period.
period, and
8
no,
foot.
you can't stack fences on top of each other.
Yeah, at the property line, though. We're talking.
So if you've got a problem with deer, 8 feet might work. See, deer can jump, but I mean,
Don't we want deer to be able to get through? Though?
Well,
depends on what you got on the other side of the fence.
I had a young goat, not mine, my neighbor's, who cleared a 5-foot fence. No problem.
Well, in this language, they couldn't even put another foot on. Couldn't put another foot on there. Kent, you had the question.
Are tennis courts regulated differently in other things that have fences?
Hmm.
Or
That's a
like
good
if you want to have a
question.
tennis court in your backyard, like
So we're talking about
Property
fences
only-
on the property
only
line.
on the property line?
Yeah,
Okay.
in this case.
So
So-
as long as your tennis court isn't on your
Oh,
property
okay,
line.
so as long as it's not on the property line,
Internal.
it's okay.
So if you were a foot away from your property line, you could put a 12-foot fence.
5 inches. You don't have to go a full foot.
not on the
That's a
property
good
line.
point.
Yeah.
Yeah, that seems like
Yeah.
it's a moot point. That seems like it just, putting standards on the
That's
On
a
the-
fun thought, isn't it?
putting standards or stipulations on the property line like this is
That can be overridden
Well, it just creates duplication of efforts, right? Then you've got, neighborhoods with two fences along property lines. I have seen that in other neighborhoods. So we're just like, do we really want that kind of aesthetic? I
So
think.
I think this is a good or interesting twist of thinking. It's like that. It's talking about the property line. Well, what if you're off the property line? You could do something smaller. Like that. What
Yeah.
they mean? I don't think that's what they mean, but it is a consequence, and again, an unintended.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe somebody's going, I mean, if it can't be on the property line, then you would want at least walking space
Between.
between the property line and the fence. So,
Oh,
you
but
know, an
but again, we're going down this slope of
Yeah.
is the purpose was per public comment. The fence was too high, and they put two fences sections together. So we're trying to address an individual, issue
Complaint.
on the property line, and as you asked, they came in 5 inches. This doesn't prevent them from doing that. So I mean, this is a change that the select board is put in that will have unintended consequences and can be easily bypassed
absolutely.
with very little, with no hesitation, no issues. So it's not going to do.
It won't solve the potential
The
conflict
problem.
between,
Right.
tenants of different, properties.
This is really, it's a design issue, and it's a I think you hit it earlier. It's a boundary dispute.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like a personal instead of a town-wide issue to address.
If I may propose, like perhaps an alternative approach from like stipulating like how the fence can be constructed as a design control, like you're saying if no fences are on the property line and one wishes to be constructed, an agreement must be made between the property owners. And leave it at that. Like let the property owners come to some resolution. I don't know. That way it's not controlling or dictating the design, but it overcomes, potential disputes.
Yeah, we start getting into
Yeah,
to
but-
civil matters at that point too that
Yeah.
are outside of our purview because
Yeah.
it's property use and so forth. So,
Sounds to me like there's a leaning towards requesting the select board not add this language altogether.
I would.
Mm.
I think it's. I mean, look at the discussion that we've had. And Trevor's been quiet. That's not allowed, by the way.
Oh, okay. Well, no, I mean, it seems like 8 feet as a one size fits all is it's probably not right to do it that way. Because there's always different circumstances, the topography, things like that, where the wall might need to be higher for some reason.
So it seems to be, Josh, what do you guys want to weigh in on this?
I'm just strike E. That's my sentiment.
Yeah, I'm saying,
So I think the recommendation in this case we could add the recommendation to our memo that be struck because of we don't like it.
So really because of unintended
creates a quagmire.
consequences.
I think unintended consequences. It's a reaction and it's designed to address a very specific event between two neighbors that could have negative consequences to other
Sure.
areas of the town.
Is there any way to say, not going to strike it all? Can you strike the last sentence, perhaps? The last sentence does seem oddly specific. Does
Yeah.
not seem like it belongs.
Well, even
Choice A. You'll go with choice A. Here's choice B, please.
but even A. I mean, that's
Yeah.
it's just not A.
Yeah.
But I don't disagree with you, Georgia. That would be, potentially. But the whole thing is slippery slope, and
Hmm.
if you want an ornamental fence, let's say you want to put up a brick fence and you want ornamental, corner pieces or something like that, they can't be up
Yeah.
at all. And if you want barbed wire fencing on top of that brick wall, you can't, because it's two fences stacked on top of each other. That's being facetious, by the way. It's an attempt at a joke.
Yeah, I think just say, we strongly suggest this not be, the change not be made. And if they push back, then we see what else we have to do. That's my sentiment as well.
Maybe we don't understand their real purpose for putting it in there. For us, for clarity, if after hearing
they
our
push
feedback,
back.
yeah.
We also have to remember, though, that this document was delivered to the select board. So at this point, it's still theirs. We signed off and delivered it to them. So they're showing us they don't have to listen to us at this stage,
Yeah.
which is a reality that we have to understand. A little bit of a limiter, but okay, I only see one more red mark.
So the one that the actual memo was written for is missing, and this is what this 4.15 temporary uses and structures. So the select board added the following: auctions or garage sales are permitted for any residence provided that adequate off-street parking exists on the premises. So I'm sorry, I left this originally off the memo.
So that's the one that you had provided some draft language.
Right.
Wait, I'm sorry, I was in the middle of,
Oh, do you want me to go back?
just for a second so I can
Sure.
finish reading.
Sorry.
And so that's like are permitted at any time?
Oh, maybe I didn't put that language in
I
right.
think that
Are not permitted.
the line that we were challenging was provided that adequate off-street parking
Yeah. Oh,
exists
right.
on the premises.
Yes. Yes.
There was some other language, I think, about frequency over the course of the year or whatever, but
Oh, so this is specific to one section of the,
I think so. That's why we can go to the.
because I was like, you're just gonna
So-
let people run.
There are other
I know,
communities.
I've seen it. My grandma on my dad's side used to run garage sales all the time.
Yeah,
Um,
there's limitations on frequency and durations. But I think the challenge we had was that provided off-street parking, because
Right. So
And
this
most
is the
parking
section
is a
where it would
nuisance.
go.
most neighborhoods don't have off-street parking.
Right.
Most neighborhoods it's street parking.
Right.
If there was a potential concern about parking along the state highway, but we don't have regulations on the state highways. So it's like, again, we're trying to put a regulation in place. And in addition, we don't have staff on hand to do zoning enforcement on the weekend. By the time they got there, sale would be done. But
And
just-
that's what I tried to communicate in this draft memo.
and they wanted that to be removed.
No, this was something they added.
This language specific is what they added.
Yes.
So what they're trying to do is just ensure that residents can have garage and yard sales.
If they have adequate parking. I think that's the issue.
The qualifiers, the adequate.
Right. So trying to limit where there have been, I mean, the idea is that there are some problematic spots where there is not adequate parking and it causes issues on roadways. So this was an attempt to
That's also an
Exactly.
equity issue, though, right? Like, folks who don't have adequate parking are likely going to be more inclined to want to have yard sales. That's an assumption, a big one. I will, acknowledge that. But I'm just trying to think about, like, who are we now limiting?
Everybody.
Well, not
Particularly
everybody.
small driveway people.
Well,
Or no driveway people.
anybody in the Lamel development, anybody in the, the quarter acre lot developments that don't have, and I'm thinking developments, not necessarily the Route 15
Yeah.
parcels,
Yep.
but anybody that doesn't have a big yard, a big space, a big field to park in, you're not going to be able to have a garage sale per that change. Again, unintended consequences and unintended limitations.
And how would you know ahead of time how many people are going to come to your yard sale?
Well, I
How
mean,
often they're going to be there? Like if you have one parking space, but only
might
a
be
couple
enough.
people come, how would you know?
But that's the same. I mean, but there are places that you don't have the garage sales. I mean, look at what they have, and then they put the garage sales in the driveway. I mean, that's where they have the table set up, so it doesn't matter how many people come in. There is no off-site parking for it. So I mean, we're by doing this, we're basically saying to a good chunk of this community that you can't have a garage sale because you don't have off-site parking.
Would
Right.
would it be better just to be silent? Like, don't add that.
That's what we were
That's what
proposing.
we're-
That's what
This,
Catherine put in the memo.
Oh, I should read the memo.
Catherine, can you go to the whatever we've got for proposed language on that? I think.
well, the number 1 here is what they were proposing.
Yep.
So you didn't have anything in your regulations, your draft regulations related to this at all.
So we just, I mean, basically, we just think that should be there. I mean, you want to limit the times or the frequency, how many you can have per year, whatever. But I think I'm concerned about only limiting this to a very select few.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I just I would feel similarly. I think it's inequitable to put those types of limitations and provides privileges to property owners that have additional parking. That would otherwise it should otherwise be a right and a privilege by the entire town unless everyone is restricted from doing so. I think that yard sales are often done as a means to make ends meet, right? And I would not want to be in a position where we prevent someone from doing that simply because of where they live. As you said, having limitations on how many yard sales, you don't want someone to have just like a running yard sale in their front yard obstructing, property. But if it only is happening once or twice a year, how obstructive to traffic is that? Truly.
Well, if it's on major highway, I could see how it would be. If it's on Route 15, I could see how it could be. It could be a safety issue. I mean, I agree. I don't think it probably belongs in there, but I do see how there could be.
If it is though, couldn't the police enforce that with the
Right.
existing regulations because they're creating a safety hazard? I mean, I feel like we're being redundant to a certain degree. I think that's ultimately the issue. It creates a safety concern that probably residents or community members have expressed.
Yeah.
And we could ask the state to enforce it as well. And the thing is, if we call the state police or the sheriff, they're probably not going to cut, right?
Hey, we get a garage sale. Can you send a cruiser?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think what can happen, similar to like if you have a neighborhood that has a problem with a lot of people speeding, right? They're not there looking for that, but if
Right.
you report it enough times, then they will do something about it, and they'll make an effort to go there on an off hours time, to check it out to see if it really is an issue. Similar with that, I
Mhm.
think.
Yeah, I think this whole thing came about because of an issue on Route 15. That's a major highway. That's a different kettle of fish, so to speak.
I used to live on Route 15 in Jericho, and it's hard. Well, bought a house on Route 15, so. But yeah, parking was hard.
And I think Catherine, you'd found us, quite a few examples of a variety of approaches from neighboring communities, from absolutely nothing to very restrictive.
And then not necessarily in the zoning too. There could be some sort of ordinance that would be required.
So I mean, overhead, we got to have enforcement, and
Yep.
and then is it? I like the term you use, the inequity.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just again, we're we're providing privilege or endorsing a privileged approach, and that just seems wrong.
So I think adding that language to what's here, if that's to add another important concept.
I think so. We're really trying to be equitable in our town. We ought to be thinking of those things.
I think there was one other thing, but that was just in the subdivision regulations. Where again, it's that one of the Act 47 changes.
Just to be in compliance with Act 47.
Yeah.
So let's circle back to the
RPDI.
RPDI question. So the select board removed our suggested language for clarity. And quite frankly, I don't disagree with that because what's there sort of covers it. But Josh has come up with a different proposal to resort or rearrange them to provide potentially more clarity. And how does this group feel about having that be part of that memo as well? Daniel.
I think that following Josh's suggestions to reorder with maintaining the language as it was makes sense. Pursuant, a follow-up larger discussion for other revisions being made to the RPDI. Isn't that the idea?
Yeah.
That would be my thoughts.
John.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think it certainly was confusing trying to rehash that, but I think Josh's proposal and his ordering makes a much more sense than it did.
Trevor.
I agree with that. I think the reordering makes it better.
Georgia.
It was remind me of the order.
My recommendation was A, D, B, C. And then if it's still confusing to them, we can probably rehash it again. But for now, A, D, B, C. And then restore our original language.
Yeah, for D to be second, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think that makes sense to suggest that to them.
Okay. Josh, do you agree with yourself?
This time I do, yes.
So, I think Catherine, if we could add that to the memo as well.
Yep.
And here's if the select board decides to push back on any of these things, then it's their choice to push back. But and just to go down through, we talked about they're not going to allow feces in anything other than AR zones, agriculture uses. So that one was fine. That one was fine because the uses are defined. The fences. Does this group agree, or let's go around let's go around the room. Josh, what are your thoughts on the fences, both the height and the placing atop one another sentence?
I would scrap their entire recommended E. So from fences to another, the whole thing.
Trevor.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Georgia.
The only reason I can see to limit fence height would be if you're blocking views of traffic, which is the front of the house, which is a different thing altogether, or if you are deprived, like we said, the state depriving somebody of light and air. So yeah, it doesn't. Yes, I agree. But I specifically think the last line, the last sentence especially.
John.
Removing it seems like too much of a civil issue.
Daniel?
Likewise, I'm in agreement with just removing the suggested changes in E from the select board. I think that as stated, it makes too many unintended consequences and doesn't really solve the issue at hand.
That sounds like that should be
Mhm.
thrown back in, and
Okay.
and then we have didn't hear any concerns with the legislative mandated changes or influence changes. Okay. So with that, we'll go through the let's just open it up, see if anybody else has any questions on the discussion. So if anybody who's on the line or in the audience would like to offer any questions.
You looking at me?
Yeah, you okay?
Yeah, I know. You're cramping.
Okay. If anybody's online
Work
would
it out.
anybody online would like to ask a question or offer comment on the items that we've discussed this evening,
Patty Davis, that's raised her hand.
Patty, go ahead, please.
Oh, yeah, on the 50-foot buffer, I'm just curious, if over time, like since 2006, and it's going back a ways, to ask for a zoning amendment, do you guys have, are you allowed to still have discretionary authority to approve just about anything when it comes to a buffer? Like 50 feet, because even though you were talking about Alan Martin, and what was the other one? Maybe
Corporate
Route
Drive.
15. Oh, Corporate Drive, that's it. Then there's not, well, obviously you don't have the discretionary authority for residential, but if residential is across the street, basically, do you take into consideration the old, or the present zoning regulations that state that it has to be nice looking, for the people across the street that are residential? Let's see, it's 8. I had it, right here. It says any development in this district shall not have an undue adverse effect on the scenic or natural beauty of the area, aesthetics, or rare and irreplaceable natural areas. So I'm just throwing out on that 50-foot buffer. My question is, how much discretionary authority do you really have, or is it up to the select board to take it or leave it, or how does that work?
Guess I'm not 100% sure your question. The 50-foot buffer is only along Corporate Drive and I keep blinking on Thompson Drive
and Red Pine.
and Red Pine. So I mean, those are the buffers along the internal roads. The
Okay,
buffer with the residential is the 200-foot buffer, and that's against all residential areas. And that part of that discussion is that we want to get into in a more in-depth review is, what does that buffer mean? What can be done with it? What is it? At this point, it's been a hands-off. There's been
I see. I'm just curious because I don't run Saxon Hill anymore. I used to, and I know that the people that live there, I don't know if they obviously must have a 200-foot buffer then.
Yeah.
Right.
There's been a lot of questions on the 200-foot buffer. Should it be a visual buffer? Is it a buffer for sound? Is it a buffer that we should be planting trees in? Is it a buffer that
Sure. I guess my 2 cents is I'd like number 8 to stay in there where it says any development in this district shall not have undue adverse effect, because that is not in the new proposed August 2023 zoning reg draft, but it is in the present one. And I don't see it in the new one. And that's just something I noticed. No biggie. I just, I'm kind of anal about this documentation. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Patty. Anyone else like to offer a comment or question on the items that we were reviewing this evening, which, for clarity, are the changes that the select board has made to the zoning revisions that we submitted to them a couple months ago?
Yeah, back in June,
Something
July.
earlier this year.
It was, I think it was June.
Okay.
No, May. Sorry.
So hearing none on that, I guess I'm going to ask for clarity on this. I'm going to ask for a motion from the commission to authorize Catherine to send this memo to the select board in our name with the edits that we've asked tonight. The edits that we've asked for or added tonight. And her memo was specifically what we had asked her to do the last time, which was get rid of the parking requirement, the off-site parking for garage sales. We've added a few things to that. And we don't have a lot of time that it needs, to get to the select board. So if the commission will authorize her to do that, then we can just move forward with it.
Make a motion to authorize Catherine to add those changes to the memo and send it to the select board.
I'll second the motion.
The motion, and it's been seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 6-0. Catherine, please go for that.
All right. Thank you very much.
7:30. Town plan discussion. We want to touch on that. Is that a lengthy discussion?
Well, it
Would it be-
can be as lengthy as you want. We will be talking about this much more at your next upcoming meetings, but I think the first thing that we want to make sure, I think has been on the agenda for a couple meetings, but Josh worked on some language that was from the public outreach meetings.
Okay.
That there is an introduction to each of the chapters. So wanted to kind of run through that just so you could see what it is, get an idea of the flavor
Excellent.
of it. And I think this is where you're going to see the town plan be most different from the 2016 town plan, because the previous one, 2016, was based on the heart and soul process. And it was a lot of the bringing the village at the time and the town together. This is just us, just the town.
Do you want to make Josh dance on this one? And
Yeah, if he's up for that.
I can dance a little bit. Let me put the tap shoes on. Sort of following up with something I want to say Patty had asked a couple meetings ago. The point in these introductions you have in front of you, both the introduction overall to the overall town plan and then the chapter introductions, was to be more layperson and user friendly and showcase the themes that we'd gotten from our public outreach forums in January and February and tie those two things together. So it would be very clear to any layperson, they heard us and they're telling us how that can fit into the town plan, because the town plan, of course, has any number of statutory requirements. But this, as Catherine said, gives you the flavor of how we're meeting both those goals. Saying in this chapter, you will read this, and here's how it ties into what we mentioned into the introduction. It's very, tell them what you're going to tell them what you told them. I hope when you read it, it was pretty self-explanatory, because that if it wasn't, then I didn't do a good job. But that was the idea.
I was comfortable with what was there.
And then the what's being done then is intertwining this language in the rest of the town plan, or the heart and soul was scattered throughout. So this is putting this language in. There were some word clouds that we came up with, and in doing some sorting through the data. Ken Signorello actually back there was a big part in helping with that. So my thought was to put that in there. That is not our hard data, but it's a good representation of some of the things we heard. So making sure it's clear that these terms are not our go-to terms, but they're themes.
Town plan is vision. It's
Right. And I think
Go ahead.
I was going to say the focus of tonight, I think more than anything in looking at it, since as Catherine said, we'll have time to go over the whole document in summary. Tonight is just, do you like the sort of the rhetorical direction we went with the introductions, the overall introduction and the introduction of the town chapters? And are you comfortable with that sort of language, as Catherine said, being dispersed throughout? Because it is a change from what 2016 looked like in terms of the rhetorical approach. I think I said it before. I didn't like that from a lay reader's perspective at all.
Mm.
It was looking back at it, even putting aside the heart and soul and which jurisdictions were being emphasized. I didn't like how it read to someone off the street. So that's the big change. I just wanted to make sure everyone was okay with that. I don't want to say a chattier style, but a more personable style than an official style, if that makes sense. Just wanted to make sure everyone tonight, my goal was, are you okay with that?
So in terms of the introductions and the summaries they provide for each chapter, I really appreciated that, and I think that it is useful for general public and more interested parties, for that matter, to at least have a good idea of, like, this is what I'm going to find in this chapter. It's more efficient. When you talk about specific language, are you referring to the bolded language in the summaries? When, like, you're saying, like, heart and soul, that's kind of a rhetorical approach from the past. But are you talking about where it says, like, more cohesive, better connected, that it, a community that is connected, diverse, sustainable, and a joy to live in? Is that the language changes that you're referring to that's being sprinkled in?
And the whole thing is new. The whole introduction is new of each chapter.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
those are highlighting some of the bigger themes that we've heard.
Okay.
But it's a whole rewrite of that.
Right. So the bolded, you're right though, Daniel. The bolded elements are sort of the you're going to hear this one again kind of stuff. And so the overall introduction sets the tone from both what our working group did and what we had from community input. But you hear that again and again throughout the document. So it's like, oh, remember when we said we wanted a walkable community back in the introduction? Well, in this chapter, which pertains to land use, you're going to hear that again, and we're going to give you some regulatory suggestions as part of the vision. You're just getting a book? Okay. Cool. Yeah, so that's that.
No, yeah, thank you for that added clarification. I appreciate that.
That was our pint-sized PC member.
And I imagine these summaries will be revised in the final draft to match any subsequent changes that are made.
Oh, sure. Yeah, and just to note, this is just some of the work that's being done on the town plan. We have boards and committees, departments, community development staff spending a lot of time and working on more of probably the technical nature of the chapter. So you'll see, like, all the census data has been updated. Which is a side note, I just want to let you know that I'm really hopeful of the next round that there's any census data that they separate the village out. So fortunately, they do provide just village numbers, and so I can separate out, but we're our own municipality. We need to have our own census data. So just as a side note. So I just want everyone to be aware that there's a lot that's been going into this behind the scenes, and it's been at your table some, but not as much yet.
We'll start seeing this
Yeah,
more
absolutely.
frequently. It would be maybe even on application nights. Maybe it's time to have a standing item on the
Yeah.
agenda. That if we don't have time, we don't have time. But if standing item to just
Yeah.
at least give a quick update, just like it is town plan discussion.
Yeah.
So that if we have an opportunity in a light night, we can just work on it.
Yeah.
Might I suggest, like, I really like that to give special attention to this and have it be an agenda item. But I also think, like, focusing on specific sections where action items are located would be ideal. Just there's context and history and that stuff can be verified outside of meetings such as this. But when it comes to, like, here's what we actually hope to do and when we hope to do it,
Oh,
I'd
that's a
prefer to
great
have
point.
more in-depth conversation.
Yeah, and I think, as the Public Works Department can say, fire maybe is a better example. Like, we need a new fire station and we need a new truck, and so it's not really up for us to say, like, no, you don't. But there are plenty of other spots in here that are more subjective. When we're talking about future land use, or we're talking about what might go in the regulations.
So
that
we're
need discussion.
we're still
100%.
looking at our first meeting of the month be for application, second meeting for planning.
Right.
So, I mean, what I'd like to see is even on the first meeting, our application
I
night,
agree.
have a even an update. And maybe it's a preparation that the next meeting we're going to be doing chapters 3 and 4 and 5 or
Right.
whatever. So it's
Right.
a staging thing, but every
Okay.
meeting we have a little bit of this and have a lot more specificity
In the planning
in the planning meeting.
meeting. Okay.
If we have, and this will allow us, if we have a night that we don't have many applications, we
Right.
have a placeholder to work more on this. So,
Sounds great to me.
Patty, your hand is up. Is it still up or is it new? Is it new or is it?
Oh, I just had one little quick thing I wanted to add to Josh, because I got to get off in a minute. When you guys were talking about the town plan, I didn't get to read the whole thing, but I wondered if you guys would think of a mission statement like, okay, clean air, clean water, we want to be sustainable, we want walkable, we want connected, like that poster that you said, Catherine, about, you know, the words everybody threw out during the input sessions. By making our mission statement first, what our objective is for the whole town: walkable, connected, clean air, clean water, sustainable, something like that, then it'll be easier when you go through every single district. As long as it goes back to that mission statement, you can't go wrong. That's my 2 cents. And maybe we'll even get a label or a logo out of it. Wouldn't that be cool? Anyway, I just thought I'd throw it out. Thanks.
Thank you, Patty. Yes, Ken.
Two things. What is the coloring in the Ken Signorello? What is the coloring in the document that's attached? It's like the yellow highlighting. What does that designate? And the green, what does that designate?
Yeah, it varies in what it is. So things are in different flux. So in some cases it says this is language that's good. Needs to be updated. So it really varies. And sometimes there's a comment off to the side.
That
So,
I understood. I could see
yeah.
that was clear. And the
So
straight
it's-
throughs are straightforward. I just couldn't understand the
Yeah.
yellow and the green.
Yeah, it varies. On
Maybe
what
a
it
little
is.
legend at the top might be
Yeah.
helpful.
Are you talking about, like, say, for example, in chapter 1, section 2, economic development is highlighted in yellow,
In yellow, what does
whereas the following
is not?
section is highlighted in green?
Then that's right. And then there's a lot that isn't. So I just think, what's the
So
difference?
yeah, so in the case with economic development, there's some of that is already been updated, some that hasn't. And so the part that hasn't is what is highlighted in yellow.
Hasn't.
Is
Also,
not,
if you-
or is it green? I
so-
don't know. It's yellow on my screen. But
if you select an area of text and then make your comment, that's what the highlighted points to.
That's not the part
No,
we're talking about.
there's
Okay.
comment highlights, but then there's
That's different. Okay.
Yeah.
Comment highlights
Yeah.
are quite obvious.
yeah, so it is a lot more of my internal record keeping, but
Okay.
you're right. It would be helpful to be.
So like the yellow, I see it's the yellow section with strike through. So obviously that's been edited.
Well, so
This is a living document.
It is a
This
living-
It
yeah.
is, and it's your document right now that you're
Yeah.
working on.
Okay.
So,
Yep.
Well, for future, it might be handy to just so that a reader could look at it
Sure.
and understand what's going on. Now I'm going to speak to you as the chairman of the Conservation and Trails Committee. I really appreciate most of the action items that we spent quite a bit of time working on are included word for word. And I appreciate that very much. Just want to remind you that when we submitted it, it was a draft. We're going to have one more meeting to approve it. I know there's at least one item that we heard at the select board goals, budget goals, that we're probably going to try to sneak in. So just be aware that there might be one more tweak coming. It'll be very minimal, I promise.
Great.
Now I'm going to speak to you as a member of the Economic Development Commission. Send them a memo asking them for input. I've gone to many of their meetings. I'm now on the commission, never on the agenda. And there's a whole section in the town plan about economic development. I don't think you've gotten any input from that commission at all yet.
I have not.
And maybe if you ask, you might.
we have,
We have.
again.
But
Well, there's new leadership, so
Yeah.
give it another shot. I would encourage you.
Thank
I
you.
will.
So-
I will.
I
Pl-
appreciate any way we can get the information.
I will
I'm
plug
gonna
it.
go
I
for it.
promise. If
Before
it's
you
there,
step
I'll
away,
plug it.
Ken, it is appreciated the effort that you've done working with Josh on the overall town plan stuff and helping bring the conservation items in. This has been a big push from the commission, try to get involvement at the beginning instead of at the end, and it is noticeable and it is appreciated.
Thank you.
Commissioners, any questions before I'll go back?
Oh, I just wanted to point out one thing. There's another group that's been working. It's the Act 171
Okay.
group, and that's about protecting forest blocks and habitat connectors. And Shu is the one who's been heading up that one. And so we're coming close to being able to insert language into the town plan, but we have a map that's been made up.
That'd be really good, because that's been an ongoing concern and an issue, and we've tried to champion the habitat connectivity
Right.
on many applications, so it'd be good to have that included.
Yep. And I should say Ken has been a part of that group as well.
Again?
Yeah.
So we just had the Conservation and Trails Committee stepped up to try to get some input on the Act 171 issue. That's the forest blocks and wildlife habitat maintenance. And so we had a hearing, and there's a report. There's in the minutes. A lot of notes were taken. Not very many people from the public were there. She was supposed to be there, but wasn't. It's recorded, obviously. You can see it. But Betsy made a nice presentation. She spent a lot of time with the individual from the state. What's his name?
Jens Hilke.
Thank you. And so I think we did a good job collecting the requirements and got some input. And yeah, there should be something coming, I hope.
Yep. Kat is working on
Excellent.
So Kat Mon is the intern that from UVM that worked with me this spring.
And I think Jens
Jens.
had done a presentation a few years ago for us, and it was really informative.
Yeah.
I mean, it was really informative.
Yep.
Commissioners, any questions, comments at this point? This is on the town plan, the process, the ideas, the approach. How is everybody feeling with this? Daniel.
My only comments, if conversation is primarily restricted to the summaries, I really appreciate them and think that they're coming along. And I think that Josh has been able to achieve his goal of making it accessible to a much larger audience by keeping the language, really clean and simple. And so there's that. I am also glad to hear we're going to be addressing specific action items along the way. Being someone that's on the energy committee, there are certain sections that I want to speak to in that
Right.
area as well. So that's it for me.
Josh, do you feel good with what you've written?
I once again agree with myself. Thank you.
That's a win. That's twice in one night. John.
I first I just want to say, definitely awesome work. It's clear that a lot of time was put into this. I will say there's just one thing that maybe it's just me, but I was a little bit confused by the wording of what you will see. Just me, when Josh, when you first told us at the beginning of this meeting, what your attempt was to explain to people what the chapter is going to do, and then you tell them that, and then you conclude with what you told them. That makes total sense to me. When I first read that and what you will see, I don't know if maybe the word see, maybe what you will read, or I don't know.
Yeah, you could-
And I don't know if it's really a problem. It's just something that stood out that I was a little bit confused on when I first read it. But after reading through several of the introductions, I got it. I'm like, yeah, okay, that was the intent. So that's
The reason I went with C is because there's also going to be like things like word clouds and graphics and such. So I went with C as opposed to just read, but I'm not too hung up on it. If you think read lands better.
it was just one thing that it tripped me up. So I just thought I'd mention it in case
Totally fair.
I had similar thought. Yeah.
Maybe. We have a comment from Paula to use find.
I like find.
Okay. Georgia.
No, I really liked how the introduction, I went to, as a just member of the public, to one of the town plan meetings, and I liked the way the introduction kind of encapsulates what people spoke of, and you kept seeing them come up throughout, which I really appreciated the way it was organized and put together. And yeah, I'm wondering, this is a weird question, but all the maps going to have to be redone?
Yeah.
That's going to be a big project.
Fortunately, we have an in-house GIS person,
Oh.
Shannon Lunderville, and she's working on
Okay.
it. Yeah.
Right.
So one of my requests for her, well, obviously taking the village out of the
Mhm.
map, but expanding past our borders a little bit. So seeing maybe where some roads go.
That'd be great.
When we're talking about our forest blocks, they
Mhm.
extend outside of the town. So somehow being able to represent that. So we're seeing that we're part of a larger.
That's a good idea. I mean,
That's a really
it
good
doesn't
idea.
stop
Yeah.
at the town line, so it's good to know. We have that same. I mean, it's the
Yeah.
same question comes up when you're looking at a property. You know, we get an application and they show us a map and they only show us the property.
Yeah.
And we never see what's on that other side. That's a great idea. Trevor.
I think it's a really good document. I was impressed with the detail, and there was one thing that sticks out because it affected me. Affects me. I live on the corner. Well, I won't say where I live, but I live on a dirt road, and I noticed that it was in the plan that there's been the recognition that there's some dirt roads are probably used more than a dirt road is intended to be used. And I just thought that was really, really good level of detail to get down to that level. And I really liked that.
So that sounds like content and everything we're going well. Is everybody feeling comfortable, including Catherine and Kat? Are you guys feeling comfortable with the pace, with the approach that's happening right now? Are we looking at any time constraints or any time targets?
Yeah, we are. I think we talked about this a few meetings ago, but the public hearing ideally should be held in November for this. And I was suggesting November 16th maybe, which would be an extra meeting in November. You have one meeting in November because of the Thanksgiving holiday.
Yep.
So it would just be sliding an extra meeting in there, just to give us a little more time to talk about it. So what needs to happen by October, that's 30 days before that meeting, statutory requirements require it to be sent out to abutting towns. I don't think we have to warn it in the newspaper at that point. It could be, but anyway, so essentially we have to have our draft ready in the middle of October.
Okay.
So
do you feel we're on track to make that?
we are, and I think we need to make sure, like you said, it's a standing agenda item. We make sure we're touching on the important things. I think like the action items and.
So knowing that we don't have that many more meetings
Right.
in this, I'd like to go turn to the commission and see, would you feel comfortable in actually dedicating time, not just as an ad hoc in each meeting, but actually to do some of the action items, some of the detail work at each meeting,
Mhm.
so that we potentially can be ready for October? Because we're only talking
It's not
2-3 meetings.
Right.
And
and also too, if there are a couple or three of you that would want to take us, help work with staff on like the action items, or Daniel, I don't know if that's something that you might be interested in.
Yeah, no, I know I'm already helping in some regards with the
The energy,
energy related
yeah.
sections,
Yep.
along with Will Dodge and Tom Yendo. But I'd be happy to talk with you further about
Mhm.
looking at other sections as well. I do, however, appreciate the suggestion to have some time committed to, like, at least reviewing those and going over the action items in each chapter.
Right.
In meetings before October.
looking forward, do you know of the application load that we have coming at us? Is it heavy? Is it light? Is it?
It all sort of depends, doesn't it, Ken?
It's seeming rather light, I think.
Okay.
And coming rather slowly.
So then with that idea, let's start dedicating time every meeting
Mhm.
to town plan heavy lift.
Sounds good.
Is that everybody in agreement on that? Is that reasonable, Josh? Is that reasonable to you? Okay.
I was muted, but yes.
Our next meeting, we have, I think, one pretty small application and one that's hard to say, right? Colonel Page is coming
Yeah,
back. So
that'll
that's
be in there.
in your September 14th meeting.
Yeah.
So I think there'll be time to dedicate. We'll make sure there's
I think it's because at this point that's got to be a priority,
for sure.
and October isn't that far away.
Right.
And I want to make sure you have the time to do it without being, and we have the time to look at it, and the other committees and so forth have the time to complete their portions of it. So Ken, that's you. At least for 3 of them, you're on the hook. And let's see if we can really push this along so that we can hit those targets, and just move it through.
Sounds good to me.
Anything else on town plan?
Can I just ask something really quick?
Absolutely.
There was an action item around the pedestrian bike plan that we had done, I think with the junction a while ago. One of the action items was sort of redo that just for the town. Whose purview does that fall under? That be correct? Because we don't have like a bicycle pedestrian commission.
There,
Trails?
there are action items committed to that. I was reading, it's in chapter 1.
It's
I'm
in chapter
trying to
1.
remember specifically where it was located.
It might be, could be under the public works section, or it could be under
Noted where it was.
just
Let me-
transportation.
Yeah,
I don't
I
remember.
think that the way I'm kind of envisioning that to happen is that the CCRPC will be able to work with us to update. I think in the next year is the time frame to really get together what the scope of that work is going to be, and then it's looking like they're going to have time to work on it in 25.
Sorry, I'm sorry, CCRP.
The Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission. It seems like they'll be able to work with us on that. And perhaps also at the same time, help us to actually develop a transportation plan that bike ped part would be a component of. We could also then have other pieces could be in there too, like there could be rails related plan could be in there. There could be an ADA related plan that could.
Georgia, where was your question? Where was this living going to live in the town plan
Yeah,
update?
yes.
So
How does that work? That was my.
yeah,
I was just calling for it as like an action item to follow that would happen after the town plan
Okay.
is done, is kind of how I was
Yeah.
picturing
So
it.
if it's not called out enough in a chapter, though, we should, here's our, this plan is outdated. And
so to Josh's
pass on
point
all of it.
earlier, the
Yeah.
more cohesive, better connected is referenced in multiple places. There's no reason this couldn't be referenced in multiple
sure.
sections.
It might have been, which is why it stuck in my mind.
Okay.
I was honestly just even wondering how that who writes that plan, how that works. But it sounds like done in regional. planning
Yeah, I'm
commission.
thinking that they're going to be able to provide a lot of assistance to
Okay.
us with that. And then I don't know if it would be a separate consultant maybe would help
Okay.
write it too, or how much capacity they really have in-house to do it, and how much we'll have to work on it.
your question, Georgia, specifically was about the trails.
It was about the pedestrian bike plan. It
Oh,
was an
pedestrian
action
bike
item, which I was assuming meant it was going to be done sometime in the future. The plan was to do it. I'm curious how that happened.
There's currently a rather outdated bicycle and pedestrian plan that's a joint
Right.
village of Essex Junction and town
Right.
Essex. So we'll be splitting it up into our own town
And update.
and updated quite a bit. It's pretty old.
It actually does look like on line 229 in chapter 1, that action was stricken. It looks like it's been.
So there's one in line 419.
Oh, okay. It's further down.
Yeah.
Moved around.
Yeah, there it is. Action 3.7.
That wasn't really a town plan related question. It was more of me just being curious. That plan.
It's all town
What's
plan
about?
related questions.
I think it's really helpful to have it in the town plan because then
Yeah.
that gives it a lot of extra weight going forward. And if we do look for any kind of grant funding assistance. If it's in the town plan, then that gives us another checkbox.
Sure.
We can do.
And again, the town plan is our vision statement. It is our visioning statement. It is an enabler for all the regulation changes and a lot of the work that does, Public Works and everybody else. This is sets the groundwork. So throw everything into it. Okay. Other thoughts, questions, town plan related? The next item that we got to hit is the minutes from August 10th. Like a motion to accept the minutes from August 10th.
I'll make a motion that we accept minutes from August 10th.
I'll second that.
Moved by Georgia, seconded by John. Does anyone want to offer changes to the minutes as written? Hearing none. All those in favor of the minutes as written signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed. Motion carries 6-0. Next item, last item, is other business. Do we have any additional business, Catherine or Kent, that you need to put in front of us? Okay.
None tonight.
With that, I would take a motion to adjourn.
Will we adjourn?
I'll second that.
Moved by John, seconded by Trevor. All those in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed. Motion carries 6-0. We are adjourned at 8:02.